Hi, Pastor Nathan Decker with your hashtag Better Together devotion for today. And this week I've been talking about time in the Bible. And one of the things that kind of was, I should have maybe understood this as a Christian when I started reading the Bible, but I didn't quite get there until I was in graduate school actually, was that the organization of the Bible, that is, we think of Genesis to Revelation, it must be in linear order and chronological type order, right? And the reality is, no, it's not. This is especially true when we come to the New Testament, where the Gospels begin the New Testament. And that makes sense because that's Jesus's life story, but the Gospels weren't actually the first things written down. If you want to know what the earliest Christians were thinking as they were writing and talking to each other, you actually go to what's after the Gospels, that is, to the letters of Paul and maybe the book of James as well. Those predate the Gospels. Paul begins writing to the churches probably around the 50s, about 20 years after Jesus's life. And sending letters to various churches. The book of James, depending on different scholars, they kind of discuss this and argue about this. It's either later than the Gospels, or it could be the very first writing that we have as the Christians within the Bible. That means very, very early, maybe even the late 40s. Which is, 10 to 15, 20 years, again, after Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. So when you look at the Bible and you think about it that way, what's helpful to understand that as you're reading, especially the letters, you begin understanding why we take some things from the letters and not necessarily from the Gospels. So if you've ever been to church on a communion Sunday, you'll hear the words of institution where Jesus, where the pastor or the presiding pastor will begin talking about, this is my body and this is my blood. Do this in remembrance of me. In my mind, I thought, well, that has to come from one of the Gospels. The reality is, no, it actually comes from the letter of First Corinthians, where Paul gives the church the instructions on how to go about doing communion. Paul's actually taking this, interestingly enough, from a book that's not in the Bible. He's taking it from a book called the Didache, or which just means the teachings of the 12. And this was a document that was going around to the church that just literally told the church how to do communion, how to do baptism, which is probably why it didn't end up in the Bible, so to speak, because it's just instructions. Okay? It's not really the story or the life-giving word that we kind of really grown to understand the Bible to be. So Paul's letters in the book of James probably come first. Then the Gospels show up, and they're not even in right order. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. That's not the order they came about in. Actually, Mark is the first Gospel that's ever written down. He's in a hurry. It's the Reader's Digest version. And then Matthew borrows Mark, probably has Mark in front of him while Matthew's writing Matthew's Gospel. And then Luke comes along, and Luke grabs Matthew and Mark and writes what he sees there and adds a little bit more to that. And then John's just, well, John's kind of the Monty Python of the group. He decides to do now for something completely different. That's John's gospel. So that's kind of what you have to understand when you're looking at the Bible and reading the Bible when it comes to the time when these documents were written down. And that's important for us as a people of faith because it helps us as we grow in our understanding of learning about what people were hearing from God. One of the things that I strive to do when I read the Bible is I try to understand, okay, what was the questions that the community of faith had then that this became the answers? And then I look at my own life because I have questions, and those answers oftentimes are helping me because oftentimes the questions they were asking in that early church are questions I'm still asking today. As you read, think about the time and maybe go and do some research, find a commentary, and find out when what you're reading was written down. It makes a difference as far as how you hear the word, how you hear God speak through the Bible. Be better together while you do it. Amen.